is Tuesday, March 6th. Today is Tuesday, March 6th, and this is the quarterly meeting of the Railroad Transportation Safety District. My name is Deb Shore. I'm serving as chair. To my left from the City Council, City Lamb and Roy Christensen, who serves as our vice chair. And to my right from the City Council, Jane Ribbold and fellow County Commissioner Todd Wilchin. We will open, this meeting is of the City of Lincoln and Lancaster County Railroad Transportation Safety District, commonly referred to as the RTSD, is subject to and adheres to the Nebraska Open Meetings Act. A copy of the Open Meetings Act is available for inspection and is posted by the entrance to this room. The RTSD agenda and all the materials that are being considered at today's meeting were posted on the RTSD website on Wednesday, February 28th. The RTSD website is also accessible by links from both the City of Lincoln and Lancaster County official government sites. In addition, on March 1st, the meeting agenda was posted on the bulletin board located in City Hall, first floor, 555 South 10th Street. A copy of the agenda is also available at the entrance to this room. One copy of the meeting agenda and all the materials being considered today are located at the dais, and complete copies of these materials are also on file at the RTSD office at 949 West Bond Street, Suite 200. And with that, we will move to item 3, approval of the minutes from our previous meeting.
I move approval of our minutes.
Second.
Motion and second to approve the meeting minutes. Amy, if you'd call the roll.
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Ribble?
Yes.
Shore?
Yes.
Wilchin?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Item number 4, election of officers. I believe we need to elect a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary treasurer.
I would move that we appoint or elect Deb Shore to be chair.
Second.
Thank you for that vote of confidence and enthusiasm. This is something I enjoy and is an ongoing challenge. Are there any other comments or nominations? If not, call the roll, please.
Christensen?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Ribble?
Yes.
Shore?
Yes.
Wilchin?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Is there a nomination for vice chair?
I nominate Roy Christensen for vice chair.
Second. A motion and second to appoint Roy Christensen as vice chair. He's done an excellent job for many years. Appreciate that. Call the roll, please.
Lamb?
Yes.
Ribble?
Yes.
Shore?
Yes.
Wilchin?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Is there a nomination for secretary treasurer?
Chairperson, sure, Bill Cudel at Crosby
Okay.
Gunsel Law Firm. Just want to clarify that we're not electing a treasurer today.
Oh, okay.
Our county treasurer is our statutory treasurer of the RTSD. We're only going to be electing a secretary.
Secretary.
Thank you for that clarification.
No.
Maybe we should
Todd is
have some,
interested?
I'll nominate Todd Wilchin to be the secretary of the RTSD.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion to nominate Todd Wilchin as the secretary. Any other nominations? Call the roll, please.
Ribble?
Yes.
Shore?
Yes.
Wilchin?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Moving along, item number 5, reportment of statement of financial activity. Mr. Meyer, good morning.
All right, good morning. Dennis Meyer with the Lancaster County Budget and Fiscal Office. Today I am subbing for Liz Sannel, who usually brings this information forward to you. So we'll just kind of go over the numbers that's within the Statement of Financial Activity, and it's for the period July 1 of 2017 through February 26th of 2018. So when we take a look at the tax revenues, our actuals collected so far is $2,786,115. And when you compare it to budget, it puts us at about a 54% collection rate. The one thing you got to always remember with fiscal years and tax years is every fiscal year has 2 different tax years taking place in it. So second half finishes out, first half then is collected in the second half of the fiscal year. The percentage is a little bit higher for collections because of some of the income tax discussions that took place. We had a few more people showing up before December 31st, making their tax payments to kind of set them up for those. So that's why you'll see that the collection rate's a little bit higher. As far as investment, interest type of income, we've collected $69,195, which has already exceeded the budget for this year. And I think it's kind of one of the norms. I look at the county side also. You kind of see the interest amounts they're not kind of skyrocketing, but they're kind of ratcheting up a little bit. So nothing really out of the estimate there. That then gives us a total amount collected, $2,855,310. We then look at the disbursement side of things. We've got the commissions and the refunds at about $52,360, operating costs at $56,571, and then the construction project costs at $10,146,166. No doubt that amount is at 82% being spent, and that really is driven by that $10 million for the South Beltway. So overall disbursements, $10,255,097. And that puts us at right around 81% spent for the fiscal year. We look at what the balance is made up of. We've got cash sitting there of $792,668, investment sitting at $11,450,999, and on that attachment, we also outline the breakdown of those investments between CDs, money markets. You can kind of see where the money is sitting out there. So that gives us a total fund balance of $12,243,667. Questions on any of that activity?
And we need to adopt this, correct? Approve it.
Just, accept it.
Accept it or approve it. Okay, I would make a motion that we approve the report on statement of financial activity.
Second. Any comments or questions? If not, call the roll, please.
Shore?
Yes.
Wilchin?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Rabel?
Yes. Motion carries 5-0. Item 6, report on an additional 1% lid calculation.
Okay, so additional 1%. Roger had talked to me a little bit about this earlier, and you know, the additional 1% when we start talking about lid calculations, we usually don't talk a whole lot about it until budget hearing shows up. It's time to adopt the budget. It's time to kind of finalize everything. Then we talk about that 1%. So today, I just kind of want to go over a couple things so that maybe it allows you to think about a few items as you kind of go through the process and you get into the budget adoption and things like that. Just to remind you, you know, the lid on unrestricted funds has the ability to grow at 2.5% plus that additional 1% that can be adopted by a supermajority vote of the board. And, you know, when we get into that, you know, I think that the question that I would throw out to you as the board members is, when the levy was bumped up this last year, during this current budget year, you know, my question would be, did the lid drive that increase or that decision that you made, or was it the projects that drove that reason to bump that levy back up? You know, majority of the time, it's probably going to be based off of the projects that the RTSD has going on. It's really not driven by the lid itself. And I think, you know, when I look at things, I try to make sure from the county board side that the lid is not driving everything. I want it to be the county board being able to make the decision on how much property tax do we need to operate the county budget at what we feel is necessary. So you know, when I think about it, I'm always kind of trying to think about it, you know, let's take a look, let's take what's available to increase that base amount so that we are able to make the decisions at the board level and not have the lid drive it from that standpoint. You know, the lid's been out there for over 20 years now. And it's confusing at the best. You know, so over those 20 years, I've seen the legislature try to adjust different items within that lid. And for the most part, nobody really knows how that's going to affect anything until you actually start dealing with it. You know, I actually testified on a bill this year, and actually between the testifiers and the committee members, I'm not for sure that any of us were on the same page. So it's just something that is not easily understood, and so when we start tweaking items, we never know what's going to happen and what kind of effects it's going to have. You know, if I could sit here and go back 20 years, when I look at the county budget and I look at what we set our base amount, you know, I sit here and think, gosh, you know, it would have been nice if we would have set it at a different way than what we did. Well, now we're stuck living with it. And that 1%, you know, if you don't take it into effect, you lose out on that option. And so, you know, my main thought is I want it to be a board decision on what we want the property tax to be at and not what the lid's driving it at. So that is why on an annual basis, I will make that request to the county board, and every time that Roger would ask me about it, I would recommend Roger bringing that 1% to the county board, because when I'll just throw out for the example right now with the RTSD, the base amount for the RTSD's lid is at about $1.6 million. The property tax request for the RTSD this last year was at $5.6 million. So right there, when I say base amount 1.6, but you're asking for properties of 5.6, first question is going to be, how does that even work? Well, that's because the lid's somewhat confusing. You get then into lid exceptions that back that back down to get within the lid. But when you start tweaking items over at the legislature, you never quite know how that's going to kind of work. And so my recommendation, you know, from just the 20 years that I've dealt with that lid, is always to take that 1% into consideration, because you never know what's going to happen the next fiscal year.
Okay, questions for Dennis? Jane?
Dennis, has the RTSD board ever not taken that additional 1%?
I don't believe it was taken this current budget year that we're in. So, yeah, so it happens that at times it does not get taken into effect.
So is that a very rare thing for the RTSD?
Relatively.
Okay. And going back to the county board has, as far as I'm aware, has always taken that additional 1%.
They have taken it the 11 years that I've been here.
Okay.
Before that, it was kind of off and on, but before I was here, I was over at the state auditor's office, and so that's where I've dealt with it for the whole 20 years, and that's where I've kind of seen the effect that the lid has had out there, and that's again why I recommend it, because to me it doesn't automatically mean that your property taxes are going to increase by additional 1%. That's still going to be the decision by the board or the council or whatever. So that decision's still going to have to be made there. But if there comes a time down the road when that you might need it, if you don't have it, you can't go back. So then, if something would come up, it could very well limit you on a decision that would maybe need to be made.
So Dennis, how many years were you at the state?
I was over there for probably 16, 17 years.
And then 11 years on the county?
Yeah.
So in your fiscal.
Long time, yeah.
Fiscal expertise, you recommend that this is the fiscally responsible route
I
to
mean,
go.
I just feel that it allows the boards to make the decisions that, that they feel need to be made instead of the lid making the decision.
You also mentioned some lid exceptions. Could you review with us what those are?
Bonded debt is a lid exception. Capital improvements are a lid exception. Those are probably your two main ones that most would deal with.
Todd?
I'll just for the record, I was actually watching the hearing in which Dennis made reference to, and I can verify that there was not a consensus of opinion in that room among the legislators as well as the testifiers. Nobody really understands the complexities of calculating the lid. And especially when we're dealing with the RTSD, I mean, we have our lid of 2.6.
Correct.
And so, I mean, I think obviously we can have a discussion about the 1% lid increase at the county board and at the city council and other bodies, but I don't think it's really applicable here at the RTSD because, again, most of the money that we spend is for our capital expense, and that is one of the exceptions to the formula.
It is.
But if for some reason someone tinkers with that, and
Right,
like
I
you
mean,
said,
that's correct, because
if someone out there wants to make it a non-exception, then the RTSD is in trouble.
correct, because the lid used to include capital outlay, which meant purchases of fire trucks, purchases of those types of items. They went back and adjusted that out and then just dropped it down to capital improvement. So what happens is you get people looking at it and trying to figure out, well, if we mess with it this way, then this should be the end result.
Right.
Well, majority of the time, that end result does not end up at that same spot everybody thought it was going to be.
And you are here today to provide information on this issue. We are
Yes.
not taking a vote. That will be
No.
part of the budget package next
Right.
quarter.
Sometimes there's just questions and stuff out there about the additional 1%. And like I said, we usually only talk about it kind of right at the end when we're just kind of finalizing things. So I just kind of wanted to throw some of that information out there. I'm more than willing to, I don't have a whole lot of people that want to talk to me about the lid. But, if you do ever have questions as you're going through the process, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than willing to try to help out and kind of explain anything that if it causes you any issues.
Thank you very much, Dennis.
You bet.
Moving on, item 7, a report of executive director status. I believe that Lonnie is unable to be here with us today, so.
Good morning, board members. Roger Figard representing the RTSD. Lonnie extends his regrets not being able to be here this morning, but he did get called away to meetings, and you all know what that's like when some other issues call. But I simply wanted Public Works to report. Lonnie is the executive director, is the assistant director of transportation for Public Works and Utilities. Formerly, that position really was the city engineer position. And I believe were he here this morning, he would be indicating to the board Public Works' commitment to continuing the contract with myself to continue to provide the executive director services for FY 18 and 19. My current contract with the city would terminate May 1st, and have visited with the director, Mickey Esposito, as well as Lonnie Birkeland, and we're currently working on a contract that would extend that for another year with the same kind of scope of services and the same conditions in serving the board. So Public Works wanted to assure this board their commitment to having leadership here and available and continued for the board, and answer any questions you might have.
All right, seeing none, let's move to report on current budget status.
Okay, on the agenda and in the packet was, I tried to save some paper. I've told you in the past that I have, my favorite piece of paper is the budget sheet that has the past budget, where we are now, and where we are and then the future. And I do have that up on the screen in case they get to that. But in a nutshell, would say we are 66% through the fiscal year, and in the operating budget, we have spent 66%, and there's 34% left to go. So I think everything in the operating budget looks quite well. Would expect the expenses for administrative services and the executive director to come on through. So again, this is up now. Our budget was 85.5. We've spent 56.5. We've got 34%. I don't see any reasons to be concerned as we go on to the end of the year. We should be on budget there. As far as the lower portion of that sheet is our construction projects, crossing improvements. We've spent very little of the railroad crossing improvements over this past year. There may still be some that would dwindle in before the end of the year. But again, that is an earmark and a budgeted amount of money for the city and the county to make use of over the course of the year. So 91st and Yankee Hill, that's the city project. We've expended 100%. The city completed the work out there, and that work is done. The final bill was 482, just under 483,000. And I'll talk about that later, but I am proposing to carry a small amount over into the next year in case the railroad has some late bills that would come in. The biggest expenditure, as Dennis indicated, is the $10 million that went to the city of Lincoln for the South Beltway. I'll also in the crossing update and project update talk a little bit. We haven't spent a lot of money or made much progress on Westwood Struck, the Hobson Yard project. We have made some progress on 33rd and Cornhusker. 33rd and Cornhusker, I would mention we've spent, as of the end of February, $69,278. Remaining budget, $930. I would expect us to probably pay out by the 1st of July in the neighborhood of $400,000 to $500,000, and then we'll need to carry the rest of that over for the current obligation that we have with Olson Associates for that work. But we see some payments of that coming in. That's really all I have to kind of update you on the current project.
Any
or
questions
current
there?
budget.
Draft budget and CIP.
How about report of projects and crossing updates?
Sure, that's great too.
Okay. I'd ask Chris Humphrey to come up and give us a quick update of kind of where things are for the 33rd and Cornhusker. We have had some activity and some progress on that of late, and she can do that for us.
Good morning, Chris Humphrey, Project Manager for the North 33rd and Cornhusker project. We've been quite busy since we started the contract with Olson Associates in December of 2017. We've been gathering information. We held a public meeting on February 22nd, and that was attended by just over 100 people, which was pretty good considering that the weather wasn't as favorable as we would have liked it. But the whole purpose of that public meeting was basically to reintroduce the public to the project and to start gathering information for the Sudbury plan that we're developing as part of this phase of the project, which we're calling the planning phase, which will span 2018. Really the focus of 2018 will be the sub-area plan and the corridor plan, and then in developing new transportation concepts that we will integrate kind of an iterative process with that sub-area plan to develop the vision for that part of Northeast Lincoln. So I just want to mention that on the website now, 33rdcornhusker.com, there's a link to the survey in the upper right-hand corner. It's an electronic survey. There's about 18 questions on there. It takes less than 5 minutes to fill out. I do have hard copies for anybody here that would like to take a hard copy home with them. There's an address there and where to mail it into, but I really encourage everybody to fill out that. It helps us gather information as we head into the design charrette, which will be incorporated with the next public meeting. That will be on May 9th. It's a Wednesday night, I believe. That's part of the 3-day charrette, and basically what the charrette is, it's 3 days of a series of meetings and closed workshops that the planners will develop the starting stages for this sub-area and developing that blueprint and the vision for this area. And then we'll take that information that we receive through the survey, through comments that we receive at the public meeting, and then we'll also start developing those additional transportation concepts for the street alignment in the area. We've been meeting with different owners, different stakeholder groups. We presented to the Planning Commission about a month ago, I believe, and then we are also speaking in front of the UPCO board coming up in May. So that's pretty much the gist of what we're doing and kind of a glimpse into what's ahead before the next board meeting, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions for Chris? Okay.
Well, I was asked, or told something this morning that I thought represented some ignorance on the project by somebody who thought they knew.
Okay.
Can you tell me when street closings and construction work is anticipated to begin?
Yeah, it's a little bit hard at this point because we have a lot of steps that we need to take from now until we start construction. So currently, we're in the planning phase that we're anticipating to get done at the end of 2018. And after that, we'll have an environmental phase. And depending on the type of environmental document that we need to create for this project, that's kind of the biggest unknown right now. So we can do an environmental assessment, which I'm hoping, I'm thinking that's kind of the way that this will go. The Nebraska Department of Transportation hasn't had an environmental impact statement for over 10 years. So the difference between those two is about 1 to 2 years time frame. And so if we have an environmental assessment, and then there'll probably be a couple years for right-of-way acquisitions, and then we can begin construction. So safe time frame that I'm kind of looking at, that if people held my feet to the fire, I would say about 2026 we would begin construction.
Right.
But obviously we will start as soon as we can. We are not making the schedule fit that date. We are trying to compress all the schedules that we can and not delay anything.
This morning, somebody who lived in that part of the town said that they went to the open house and they walked away knowing for certain that we were going to start street closings and construction this building season.
No,
So,
no, that would be nice. We do hear a lot of comments from the public that they want it constructed next year, and there is a process that we need to go through, and we definitely want to make sure that what we construct is going to fit for that future vision out there. I do also want to mention that we're coordinating with the Dead Man's Run study. That is a project that's being developed in coordination with the United States Corps of Engineers, the Lower Platte South Natural Resource District, and the City of Lincoln watershed. They will begin design this year, and construction for that project, which is basically along Dead Man's Run from Cornhusker Highway to 48th Street, and then some detention in the Fleming Fields area. Construction for that project will start probably fall of 2020 at the earliest, maybe 2021, but that project will also have street closings. They're proposing to replace a couple bridges to open up the capacity for the waterway in there. So we are coordinating with them as well, so.
And the environmental studies you mentioned earlier, those are all federally required.
Correct.
That's why it seems to take so long, but to access federal funds, this is a required process and document to submit.
Correct. And we would still be going through some of that process anyways, even if there wasn't federal funds, because since we're working in near a floodplain, near Dead Man's Run, there would be Corps of Engineers permits that we would need to acquire, and those have similar conditions attached to those permits.
Any other questions? Todd?
And so just a point of clarification, the planning phase, when do you anticipate that? And at the conclusion, there would be a design that will be approved, and that way the public could plan accordingly?
Yeah, at the end of 2018, we're hoping to have the sub-area plan and the corridor plan to the point where it can be approved and adopted by the appropriate boards and agencies. And at that point, we anticipate to have additional transportation concepts developed. Hopefully, we'll have one or two preferred alignments, but basically anything that meets that basic need of the project, that being improving the safety along those rail crossings, improving the delay time, improving mobility, multimodal connectivity, anything that meets those basic needs of the project by federal code, we need to study in additional detail in environmental phase, which will start in 2019. And after we look at those project needs, we'll also have project goals. So some of those project goals may be compatibility with the sub-area plan, minimizing right-of-way impacts or minimizing other environmental impacts. And then we kind of look through those goals, and then that's how we systematically determine what transportation concept would best fit for this area of Lincoln. So we'll have maybe not one, but we'll have a pretty good idea at least of a couple of them, and then in the environmental phase, we'll start systematically weeding out some of those concepts. So we'll have a lot better idea than right now. I say it's kind of like a Christmas present now that we get anxious because we want to open it, but we don't know what's inside, and so that's kind of what we need to do with this next public meeting and in this May to July timeframe when we're going to be doing a lot of this heavy work of sub-area plan and developing that vision and developing those transportation concepts that are going to be incorporated back into it. We'll have a lot better idea. And then at that point in time, we'll also be talking with the Nebraska Department of Transportation on what's that environmental document that we're going to have to create. And then we can start negotiations, hopefully sometime mid this year, so that we can bring the contract to the board in December for the environmental phase, because that'll be a bigger contract.
Okay, is that clear? Okay.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, continuing on, I'll talk a little bit more about a couple of our other crossing projects like the Hastings sub and West Woodstruck a little bit more when we're talking about the budget. I don't really have much to update you because there has been a significant change in the management and leadership with the BNSF Railroad. Amber Stoffels, who was the manager of public projects for Nebraska, Colorado, and Wyoming, has been replaced with a new manager. This manager is coming from the Missouri area, Springfield will be moving to Kansas City and servicing Nebraska out of Kansas City. Amber was in Denver. What I just found out this morning also is that the managers for public projects report to two assistant directors of public projects for the railroad. They just have two of them, a western region and an eastern region. And Amber reported to the western region director, assistant director, Megan, and she was out of Seattle. But I just found out this morning that that area also will be transferred, and Lynn Leapfried, who is out of Minneapolis, will be the assistant director of public projects. that supervises Jeremy. So we're back into a little bit of a learning curve. However, I would tell you that I have worked with Lynn Leapfried in the past, and I'm fairly comfortable and confident in her abilities. And Jeremy did call yesterday, and we talked, and we've made plans for him to be in Lincoln next week. So I'll have a couple of hours with him on Thursday the 15th. The goal of that meeting is to include the county engineer, the Lower Platte South NRD, city parks, city public works, the airport authority, and it's more of a meet and greet. I think Amber Stoffels has done a fairly good job in transferring projects and information to Jeremy, but we'll try to officially do that and hit the ground running then with Jeremy so that we can start making some additional progress. The only other thing on crossings that I might say is we continue to work with OL&B Ready Mix, and it looks like that crossing on Y Street just east of the university campus probably gets replaced later in the spring. The crossing on 22nd Street that goes over to Lincoln Lumber, I'm still in conversations with them. It needs some repair, but we don't have any agreement at this point in time, so I'll keep working on that. The other thing I wanted to share with the board this morning is one of the exciting things, and if I can get our folks back to bring up, the Nebraska Department of Transportation approves research proposals, and one of the great things about having a university here in our town is that sometimes you can get some studies and things done. So the Nebraska Department of Transportation has approved a research project titled Nebraska Rail Crossing Safety Research, submitted by the Department of Civil Engineering and Dr. Emil Kadek, who is a civil engineer in the department. And the primary give you some background on the study. It really safety at the junction of highways and rails has been a concern for a long time. We all know that. Harlan Layton used to show up and remind us that pedestrians and cars never won in a conflict with a train. And 97% of these junctures are at-grade crossings. They're not bridges and separated. And even though we all know the trains have the right-of-way, people sometimes behave poorly. So the Civil Engineering Department, with the recent fatalities out in West Lincoln, specifically are proposing to study driver expectation, the kinds of safety improvements that are at urban, at-grade intersections that aren't quiet zones. And they're also saying that because of recent crashes, it really calls for a review of the motor vehicle driver expectancy. So there's two main objectives for this research project. It's to update the NDOT's accident prediction model for all rail crossings using the latest crash and rail crossing inventory, and to develop guidelines for improving safety at urban rail crossings that are not quiet zones but are in the vicinity of other quiet zones. And then the expected benefits of that would be to come up with a new crash prediction model that will help us make better decisions, help boards such as yourselves make better decisions in budgeting improvements and safety equipment to go to these crossings. And as a part of that, while my name is not on there, there is a 5-person technical advisory committee, of which I've been asked to be added by the Nebraska Department of Transportation to serve as a technical advisory committee. I have advised the NDOT that I'd be excited and happy to serve on that committee and work with the University of Nebraska and see what kind of information they come up with, and then we can continue to use that both in the city as well in the county in prioritizing projects and helping us make decisions about the kind of projects and safety equipment to recommend to the board for these at-grade crossings. So I'm excited about that, and that I believe the NDOT has already signed the contract with the University of Nebraska, and they'll be getting started, and I will give the board updates as that information moves ahead.
Any questions for Roger regarding that project and his participation?
No.
Okay. I believe we are on to consideration of letter of intent for budget and audit.
Maybe we ought to do the budget
Okay.
this time. I'm sorry.
That's right.
Okay. Item
Step ahead here.
Item 10, okay. Let me go back and pull back up. Okay, going back and using the same sheet, at the far right-hand side of my favorite sheet, the FY19 draft budget, I'm proposing a slight increase in the operations portion of the budget. I added $2,000 for the superintendent or the executive director. You don't pay that out unless that's the actual charges that come in. I added $500 to the support and clerical services. Amy has been doing a really good job, and we're continuing to try to clean up files and records and get things in shipshape order and get more on the web and in the cloud. So a slight increase there. That's also where Liz Thanel's time is charged in helping with budgeting and making sure the bills get paid. And that has been a tremendous asset to me is in following that. And we're tracking and keeping all of those invoices and documents on a shared server between the city and the county so that we're able to know where we are on a regular basis. Legal services, I'm proposing to up that from $7,500 to $8,500. Next quarter in the June meeting, we will have before you a proposed contract for Crosby Gunzel to continue their service. And while I've increased that number, their proposed rates that they'd be bringing to us wouldn't be changing. The reason that I actually increased the budget amount is I'm actually asking them to do more review and update. This last year we spent time working on the engineering contract document that the RTSD uses. We need to upgrade our schedule of record retention that's required at the state level. So I'm just increasing the budget to have the dollars there so that when I do ask Mr. Kudalek to do some work that we have that. I wanted to make sure that you understood their rates aren't going up. They're continuing to serve the board very well at a discounted rate. We appreciate that. The rest are pretty much just, I think there's about a 5% proposed increase in the operating expenses for next year. Just looking at inflation and that kind of stuff. Again, if we don't use the money, we won't spend it. That's what would be proposed. So would propose that to go from $85,500 to $89,700. Down below in the construction projects, again, that first item for the crossing improvements, $250,000 for the city, $50,000 for the county, for a total of $300,000. I'd propose budgeting that again in the upcoming year. If for some reason in any given year we had a significant increase in crossing work in the county, there isn't anything that would keep us from using the total of $300,000 split a different way. The county isn't limited to the 50 in there. Okay, down in the construction projects, 91st and Yankee Hill is done, but I'm proposing to carry $10,000 over. It's not unusual to get a late bill from the railroad, and if something come in, that would just be there. If we don't get a bill, it'll just go back into the budget. The underpass, the trail underpass on the east side of Salt Creek near J Street with the NRD, the $50,000, I'm just proposing to carry that over. They still don't have a finalized agreement. Miscellaneous engineering and emergency and safety, we typically budget those each year at $100,000. I'm just proposing that would again be the amount we would put in there. Okay, now, for 33rd and Cornhusker,
Roger, I'm sorry,
Yes.
for miscellaneous engineering, the previous year was 65,000, and then next year you want it up to 100,000?
actually, it was 100, and we took 35,000 out of that and moved that down to, I think, West Woodstruck
Okay.
as a safety project to use. Thereby, we didn't increase the overall budget at all, we moved it back, so I'm just proposing to restore that back to that similar amount.
Okay.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because it does show 65, but that's because we moved the money. Okay, so for 33rd and BNSF, I'm showing $2.5 million as a potential budget for next year. That's for a couple reasons. I'm going to actually thumb down to the CIP, 12-year CIP, and go over to where we have 33rd and Cornhusker. Now, this is the new proposed, so what I want to point out to you is under the current CIP that is published, we had $1 million this year, and we had $1.2 million in 1819 and $1.2 million in 1920 and $3.5 million in 2021. Well, as Chris told you, we're currently under contract for just a little under $1 million for the planning phase, of which about half of that will get paid out by the end of this fiscal year. But by the end of 2018, we're hoping to be in a position to sign a new engineering document. Remember, our RFP allowed us to go out and we selected a firm based on planning, environmental, and preliminary engineering. Well, we've only contracted for the planning portion of that. The other two pieces, we still have a selected firm, but we have not scoped those contracts, and we have not negotiated, or we haven't signed a contract for that. But we want to be budgeted so that we have that opportunity. Upon advice and past practice from our legal representation, when the RTSD enters into a contract, we really need the full amount of that money in that fiscal year. So I'm suggesting that a environmental and a little bit of preliminary engineering contract in this fall, in November or December, could be in the range of $2 to $2.5 million. So I took the 1.2 in 1819 and the 1.2 in 1920 and put them together in 1819. Plus, we need to put some money in there for incidentals, Chris's time, so there's 100,000 in there. So 1.2 is 2.4. I added 100,000 to that. I would remind the board that money couldn't be spent without going through a scoping and a negotiation process and bringing a formal contract to this board, just like we did for the one with Olson's previously. And then in 1819, I put $100,000 in there again for incidentals or possible change orders. Chris's time for the city management of that project. None of my time is being charged to the RTSD or to that project. It's all being covered in the RTSD's executive director payment to the city, and there aren't any other costs there. So when you're comparing and looking at the proposed CIP versus the last, that's a significant increase in 1819, but that would simply mean that we'd have the money there available to enter into that contract should the board be interested in doing that, and assuming we're at that point. The other thing I want to point out is that $1 million that's in 1718. We're obligated to Olson's to the tune of $930,000. And whatever of that doesn't get paid out by July 1st, we need to carry over or rebudget. So if we pay out 4 or 5, whatever of that million that isn't paid out, at the June meeting, I will estimate what that is and add that also to the 2.5. So that 2.5 will go on up so that we have the money to finish paying the Olson contract, and we still have the 2.5 available should the board want it in 1819. $10 million in there for the South Beltway. We're solid on that. I'm proposing a $25,000 placeholder for the Lincoln Feasibility Quiet Zone. That's Southwest Lincoln in there again, not knowing exactly what's going to happen with the Hastings sub. And a couple of the other crossing. Again, by putting placeholder money, it's there and available if we need it. We need to come back to the board and ask for what to do in there. The same for the Hastings sub feasibility. I've put $100,000 in there. The tough thing, I think, for the public to understand, and maybe even for me, it's very, time is money, you all know that. And we sign a contract for our engineers to work with the railroad and get a project ready to move ahead. And we've been doing that with West Woodstruck, and we've been doing that with the Hastings sub relocation. But you keep contacting them, you're spending time and resources doing that, you're not getting responses back, or the responses that come back are just more questions and they want more information. That time equates to money and it burns up budget that perhaps if everything had been perfect and the railroad was here every day and we got the answers, we might have been done by the end of this fiscal year. But it's clear we're not going to be. So I have put some additional money in both of those for us to be able to contract and do whatever we need to do to keep the railroad engaged and keep our consultant answering questions. Amendments to those contracts would, if we have the budget, could be signed by myself and the chair, but again, they wouldn't be done without some discussion that that's the right thing to do to move ahead. So the placeholder money on those two. Do you have a
Are those
question?
items that you will be discussing with Jeremy? Are you going to
Yes.
get to that level?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Trying to push. I'm hoping that I could get him to come to Lincoln at least once a month. Whether we'll be able to do that or not, I don't know. Okay, the next one is Pine Lake Road, the OPPD crossing at Pine Lake Road. There was $100,000 in this year's budget and $500,000 in next year. The intent this year was to pay for right-of-way and agreements with OPPD at that crossing just east of Campbell's Nursery area out there on Pine Lake Road. If that work doesn't get done and the city doesn't bill us, I will carry that $100,000 over and add it to the $500,000, and then we'll see how much work they get done. We do have currently an interlocal agreement with the city that upon receipt of expenses from the city, we could pay them up to $100,000 yet this year. If we get some of those and we pay it out, we'll only carry over that's unexpended. The same with Jamaica Trail connection. We had budgeted $200,000 this year, and then the existing CIP showed $200,000 over 3 years, this year, next year, and the following year. And the $200,000 for this year was intended to pay for the engineering contract. If the City Parks Department has a signed engineering contract and can submit that to us, our interlocal would allow us to transfer that money to them to pay for their engineering. The other thing that they've asked to help with just cash flow is whether or not the RTSD could afford to take the $200,000 from 1920 and move it back into 1819. So I'm showing both of those 200s in that first year. It does not seem to hurt our cash flow. So that's what I would be proposing. Again, whatever that $200,000 that's in this year doesn't get expended, I'll carry over and add it to the 400, and then we would both of those projects would need new interlocal agreements, financial interlocal agreements that would probably come to the board either in June. If we're not sure where we are on those, they would be at September authorizing those payments. And then there's Woodstruck with the $25,000 in there. We have most of the options costed out for West Woodstruck. We're just waiting to hear back from the railroad on do they have a preference. And there would always be the option certainly whether to move ahead and do anything at all. There is we don't have a crash problem or a safety problem that we know, even though it doesn't meet standards. And I know our county engineer is here, and certainly if she wants to weigh in, I would welcome her to the podium. We'll keep pushing on the railroad and then try to bring back what we think the railroad would support, and then with the county engineer weighing in, what would we recommend to the board to do or not do? So, Pam?
And I think the biggest issue here is the amount of traffic in the area. It doesn't have a lot of traffic, but it's also an area in the county where not every mile has a section line road. So if we were to close a road, it's really detrimental to our grid, to getting people to their properties. And so what happens in this area is we have, of course, a crossing at a really awkward angle on Southwest 140th Street. That is an area where the county shares maintenance with the adjacent county because it's a county line. And then we have another crossing on Parker and then Wittstruck. And we do get a lot of complaints from the resident on Parker that sometimes the tracks are not passable. And Roger and I have tried to approach the railroad that indeed they are very difficult to pass. That makes it a little more complex. The railroad also has like a maintenance road or a yard where they store materials adjacent to the tracks in between Southwest 140th and Parker. And so sometimes the adjacent residents use the railroad maintenance area, and I believe Mr. Feigart did once too, to kind of cut across to get to Parker when there is a train on the tracks. And of course, the railmaster is not thrilled when this happens. And so it's an area where we need to figure out a simple, common sense approach to how to make it safer, and we haven't found that, unfortunately, at this time. But I believe we're dedicated to continuing to work on it.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And I appreciate Pam's help in that area. So then at the bottom of that CIP sheet, it just, as I related before, it shows carrying over or moving ahead the Salt Creek Underpass and that feasibility. I did hop over. There is a new project, potential project, that shows up on this sheet. It's towards the bottom here. It's called RTSD BNSF North 48th Street Underpass. There's $100,000 proposed in 1819. The city's long-range transportation plan shows the improvement of North 48th Street from Adams Street across Cornhusker Highway, underneath the BNSF tracks up to Superior Street. And while it is not in the current 6-year city CIP, it's right on that outside edge and is a project that will probably start competing for priority in the city's transportation plan. One of the tough issues in that will be, what do you do with the underpass there at 48th Street? Can it accommodate a 4-lane roadway? I think that's what's proposed for 48th Street itself. So I, at the request of the city, partnering with them, and have put $100,000 as a placeholder or seed money, such that if the city hired a consultant to do a feasibility study to determine what can we do with that underpass without necessarily building a new railroad bridge. Is it possible maybe to be creative and get a 4-lane roadway under there and not have to build a new bridge? That would be very helpful in determining what the future budget of a project like that would be. So it's here as a placeholder. Again, it would require an interlocal agreement between the city and this board to transfer or expend any of that money. So what I'm telling you is that's the purpose. It's here. It couldn't be expended without us coming back to you and asking you to approve an interlocal agreement, depending on what the city might do or not do as they go on into this upcoming year. So that's another project to the future.
Any questions?
That's the other thing. I would simply say, please review those, the one-page budget sheet for the upcoming year, the long-range plan. Nothing is finalized at this point. As we get closer to June, I would actually then start running hearing back from you, I will run some cash flow documents to go along with that to put us in a situation so that we know what we would be asking for in the way of a budget and possibly what our levy request would be from the county board. So,
Okay, I believe we do need a motion.
no, there's, you don't,
Okay.
that's just a report on where it is.
Oh, to see,
Yes.
see attachment on item
Yep.
A, okay. Now we're to number 11.
Yes.
Yes.
Is Mr.
Consideration of letter of intent for budget and audit.
And as Mr. Jurina comes forward, I would simply say that as your executive director, I am recommending that we continue to have BKE continue to do the service for us and remind us that this isn't just a budget, it's also an audit, helping me with a number of financial issues over the course of the year and getting things filed with the state auditor's office. So Tony will go over what's in this letter of intent and the work proposed for the upcoming year. So.
Thank you, Roger. I'm Tony Jurina with HBE LLP here in Lincoln, and what you have is our engagement letter for the upcoming year. This engagement letter, in the engagement letter, we plan to audit the books and records of the RTSD. In the audit, we will also perform tests of RTSD's compliance with the provisions of applicable laws, regulations, contracts, and agreements. We intend on issuing the report, which will include budgetary comparison schedules, a schedule of account with county treasurer, schedule of certificates of deposit, schedule of insurance coverage, and schedule of valuations, rates, assessments, collections, and net taxes receivable. Also, in this engagement, we will assist the RTSD in the preparation of its budget for the year ending June 30th, 2018. We will also attend these quarterly board meetings and any other board meetings that may be called. During the year, we will also be available to answer any questions that Roger or Liz Stanel or anybody else from the RTSD may have concerning the audit or the budget. The fee for this year is, which includes all the items that I just discussed, is $11,900, which is like a 3% increase from the prior year.
And how long have you been serving in this role?
HBE or the prior firm that had?
The prior firm.
Oh, probably over 10 years or so.
Historical knowledge is valuable. Now, we do need action on this side.
I would make a motion that we authorize the board chair to sign the engagement letter with HBE LLP.
Second.
You did say that wrong.
It did change just recently, so that's
Oh.
okay.
Call the roll, please.
Yes.
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 Yes. Okay, motion passes 5-0. We'll look forward to
Thank you.
working with you for another year. Any other non-agenda items or opportunity for public comment? Rick, you want to say anything? Nope.
I move adjournment.
Second?
All right, I'll remind you, our next meeting is Monday, June 4th, in this meeting room at 11 o'clock. Call the roll, please.
Yes.
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 All right, we are adjourned. Thank you for your time and attention.